This is Dr. Bill Beanie, and today I have a very unusual message that I want to bring. And the message is this: what is the one secret that most husbands never want their wives to know about? You say, what in the world? Well, you know, wives sometimes have secrets from their husbands of different kinds, and sometimes husbands have secrets from their wives. Doesn't mean they're harmful, just things they've never shared with each other. But there is one secret that no husband ever wants his wife to know about. And you know what that secret is? It was brought out on WebMD. That's the site that doctors have on the internet. And doctors, after a great deal of research, came up with the fact that men are sexually aroused, 72% of them, by sight. Or in other words, looking at a woman that's provocatively dressed, skimpy affair. And man is aroused sexually by his sight or by looking. Now, only 12% of the women, the doctors say, are aroused by looking at a handsome man. They say that women are aroused by being touched or caressed. That's the difference between man and woman in their sexual desires. Now, let's look into this just a little bit deeper and come up with some conclusions that we can. You know, and perhaps this would help some of us to avoid getting into sin and getting out of God's will. There was a case in the Bible where sight caused one of the greatest men in the Bible to go into sin. You know, the greatest man in the Old Testament was David. God said that David was a man after his own heart. That's the only man in the Old Testament that God ever used that expression. David was a very special man. But there was an incident in David's life in which David, because he looked at a naked woman, went deep, deep, deep into sin. Let me read you about this incident of what sight did for David when he looked at a woman that he should not have been looking at. It's recorded in 2 Samuel, the 11th chapter. And it came to pass, after the year was expired, the time when kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all of Israel, and they destroyed the children of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David tarried at Jerusalem. In other words, David was idle. He sent his men out to fight, but he stayed at home. He had nothing to do. You know, there's an old expression we used to have in Kentucky that an idle mind is the devil's workshop. But while David tarried at Jerusalem, what happened? Verse 2. And it came to pass in the eventide that David arose off his bed and walked out onto the roof of the king's house. He was in his palace. It was high above all of the rest of the houses there in Jerusalem. And from the roof of his house, he was out on the roof, probably a starry night, he saw a woman washing herself. In other words, she was taking a bath. And the woman was very beautiful to look upon. There's two words here that stand out: saw and look. David saw her, and he saw that this woman was very beautiful that was taking a bath, and he looked upon her. And then lust stirred up in David, because, as the doctor said, 72% of the men can be aroused by looking upon something that's sexual. Verse 3, and David sent and inquired after the woman. Now his sight is swinging into action. He said, find out who this woman is. And one said, this is Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. This was a married woman he was looking at, which makes it even worse what he did. What did David do then? He followed his lust further. Verse 4. And David sent his messengers and took her, Bathsheba, and she came unto him, and he lay with her. In other words, he had sex with her. And I don't blame Bathsheba in that. This was the king. The king could just say the word and he could have had her head chopped off. You did whatever the king said. And she was purified from her uncleanness, and she returned from her to her house. And the woman conceived, that is, she was pregnant, and sent and told David and said, I am with a child. So the scene becomes more complicated. It started out by what seemed like an innocent look at a woman taking a bath, and then lust took over because the sight of his eyes aroused him so that he took the woman, not only had sex with her, but got her pregnant. And that isn't the end of the scenario. And then when he was afraid that her husband was going to find out and there would be a big scandal about it, David did the most dastard thing that he could ever do. David committed the greatest sin of his entire life. He had the woman's husband killed, Uriah the Hittite. He told Joab, who was the head of his army, go out into battle and take Uriah the Hittite into battle with you and put him out in the fiercest part of battle. And then when he's out there with the enemy all around him, withdraw your troops so that he will be killed. Can you imagine David doing a thing like that? This shows the power of Satan and how that he can get into men. And so David went into deep sin because of the lust of the eyes. Now, you know, there are some famous people that had some sayings about the relationship between men and women. Let me read a few of them, and some of them are kind of funny sayings, but they've got a lot of wisdom to them. Will Rogers said, there are two theories about arguing with a woman, and neither one of them work. Brian said this, the only reason I would ever get a sex change operation, it would be so I could see what it's like being right all of the time. Oh boy, I bet that got him into trouble. Sigmund Freud once said, what do women want? The only thing that I've learned in 52 years that women want men to stop asking such dumb questions as that. That was Bill Cosby that made that statement. Then there was the statement by Zsa Zsa Gabor. She said, to a smart girl, men are no problem. They're the answer. And then John Mason Brown had this to say, America is a land where men govern, but women rule. P.J. O'Rourke had this to say about the relationship of men and women. There are a number of mechanical devices which will increase sexual arousal in practically every woman. Chief among these mechanical devices is the new Mercedes-Benz 380 SL convertible. Chris Rock had this to say, there are only three things that women need in life, food, water, and compliments. Marlene Dietrich had this to say, most women set out to change a man, but when they've changed him, they really don't like him anymore. And Margaret Mead said, I do not believe in using women in military combat because females are too fierce. Milton Berle had this to say, the problem with life is, by the time you can read your wife's mind, your library card has expired. Mike Vanata said this, when my wife says she'll be ready in 5 minutes, that means I have about enough time to fly out in space, circle around the moon, write a book about it, and come back home. Joan Rivers said, a man can sleep around and there's no questions asked. But if it takes 19 or 20 mistakes for a woman, then she's a tramp. John Belts Jr. said this, the secret to winning an argument with a woman is just to be dead. And finally, Mae West said, good girls go to heaven, but bad girls go everywhere. So there were some of the quotes that people of wisdom have had to say, some famous people. You know, there is one secret, as we said, that most husbands never want their wife to know, and that is they can be sexually aroused by looking at another woman who's provocatively dressed. Stuart Hamblen wrote about a secret. Stuart Hamblen was a great songwriter. He was a good friend of mine. He used to come and sing revivals. And one time when Stuart was up and the revival was over and we were out having a late night coffee or an early breakfast, as we often did after the meeting was over, he said, "I want to tell you the story behind me writing the song, 'It Is No Secret What God Can Do.'" He said, "I went over one night next door to my friend's house, John Wayne." Stuart lived next door to John Wayne. And he said, when I went over there, said John Wayne was having some movie stars and celebrities there, and said the Duke told him, said, "I'd like for each of you to tell me what it was that made you famous, that gave you the idea that make you famous in Hollywood." And different ones made their statement. And finally, John Wayne said to Stuart, "Stuart, what made you famous? What's the secret? You're a great songwriter. Your songs have gone around the world. The song, 'This Old House,' was a #1 list for many weeks on the best-selling list of songs." And Stuart said, "Well," he said, "I was over at John Wayne's house." He told the other movie stars of why he became famous, and said, "The Duke talked to me and he said, 'What made you famous?' These other movie stars have told what got them on the road." And Stuart said, "I told them all, well, it's no secret what made me famous. It was the Lord. The Lord caused me to have the ability to write songs. And it's no secret what God can do." And then he said the meeting of the movie stars broke up, and he said he started to go out the front door, and said John Wayne stopped him and said, "Stuart," said, "you made a statement that stuck with me." And Stuart said, "What's that?" He said, "You said, 'It is no secret what God can do.'" And the Duke said, "Stuart, you ought to write a song about that. You're a songwriter." So he said, "I'll think about it." And as he walked back over to his house next door, said he sat down and was thinking what John Wayne said, that he ought to write a song about, "It is no secret what God can do." And he said the old clock on the wall began to chime out midnight. It was an old grandfather clock. And he said as he listened to that clock chime, he picked up his pen and began writing the words to "It Is No Secret What God Can Do." And it started like this: "The chimes of time ring out the news. Another day is through. Someone slipped and fell. Was that someone you?" And he said he continued to write, and when he finished the song, he looked back up at the clock, and it was 14 minutes after 12. He had written a song that would become a #1 hit around the world. He had written it in 14 minutes. And you know, my friends, I want to close this little discourse today with this thought: it is no secret what God can do with your life. The Lord loves you. He gave His Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, to die for you. And if you today would just right now bow your head and admit to God that you are lost, that you have sinned, and we all have sinned, and ask Christ to come into your heart and let the Lord know that you, right this moment, are willing to trust the Lord as your Savior. If I can be of help to you in this matter, feel free to write me about it, and I'll answer your questions by mail, or if you live in the area where I am of Wright City, Missouri, you could set an appointment and come by and talk to me about your salvation. My mailing address is Dr. Bill Beanie, P.O. Box 377, Wright City, Missouri, 63390. Thank you so very much for listening to this brief message. Goodbye, and God bless you.